tonight on this foggy Tuesday. Welcome to Social Histories, a story slam celebrating primary care. We're so excited to have you here. We hope to provide you with some laughter, some tears, some inspiration, and most importantly, plenty of food and falafel. So please get seconds if you're still hungry.
So hi everyone. So we are UCSF's chapter of Primary Care Progress, and we've been putting on Social History since 2014. My name is Jessie, and this is Sophie, Lily, Amalia, Ariane, and Eileen, and Simon standing right there. And so we are UCSF's chapter of Primary Care Progress. Primary Care Progress is a national organization, and we are an international network of leaders, and we're working together to transform primary care. So we just want to get an idea of who all is in the room. So if you're a student, would you mind raising your hand? Amazing. Thank you for taking time away from studying to come be here with us. If you're a provider, could you raise your hand? Great. Our role models, who we hope to be one day. And if you're a community member, could you raise your hand? Great. Okay. I think that's all I'm supposed to say. We're so happy to see all of you, and thank you for being here.
That's me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna come a little closer. Okay, so if you've been to Social Histories before, welcome back. If you have not, each Social Histories has a theme. So the theme for our event tonight is resistance. And so I'm gonna start with a quote by Angela Davis. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And in that spirit, we're hoping you'll feel inspired throughout the evening. And if you haven't seen it yet, we have a banner sort of around the corner behind the drinks that says resistance is ... And we have sticky notes so that you can sort of fill in our blank, and we can make a nice resistance is wall by the end of the night, and we'll refer back to it. So if you are inspired during, take notes, during intermission, add to our resistance wall. Thanks.
Great, and we're really grateful for the support of all our sponsors this evening, including Primary Care Progress, the San Francisco Health Network, the UCSF Graduate and Professional Student Association, the UCSF Associated Students of the School of Nursing. And we also wanted to thank, of course, our wonderful speakers for sharing their stories and time with us tonight. We couldn't have this event without your generosity, and we want to remind everyone that while the stories will not contain protected patient health information, they do contain some personal information, so please be thoughtful and respectful when sharing the stories about this event outside.
So we are about to get started, but before we do, I would like to introduce the person who's going to be guiding us through tonight. Dr. Joseph Pace is a first-generation Italian-American. Joseph was born and raised in New York City and moved to the Bay Area by way of Philadelphia in 2000 to attend the UCSF Primary Care Internal Medicine Residency Program based at SFGH. In 2002, during his second year of residency, he began working at Tom Waddell Health Center, the city's flagship healthcare for the homeless program, where he was appointed medical director in 2011. He was motivated to become a primary care doctor as a way to contribute to the cause for social justice. Joseph completed the California Healthcare Foundation Healthcare Leadership Program in 2015. And in addition to his clinical and administrative work, he teaches in the primary care residency program at SFGH. In 2015, he received the Jane Balowitz Award for volunteer teaching at SFGH. And outside of work, Joseph is coming up on 10 years as a host of City Visions, a weekly live public affairs call-in show on local public radio, 91.7 FM KALW. So we can have a round of applause.
And a round of applause for our student organizers. How's everybody doing tonight? Great. Is anyone lonely, meaning there's a seat open next to you? Could you raise your hand? No, and there's one seat over there. One seat over there. All right. So work your way up here if you'd like. There's a little bit of room here in the front if you'd like to come up towards the front. We have one of our speakers who needs a seat, though, right over here. Okay, great. Okay, well, and do you have access to your little sticky notes? People have those? Yes? Okay, great. So my ask for you is, as the mood inspires you this evening, as you hear a story, just jot down a word or a phrase that is consistent with the theme resistance is. And what we'll do is we'll read some at the beginning of the second half, and then we'll read some more at the end of the evening. So that way your words and your thoughts can be represented in our evening together. So when I heard this title or this theme, I don't know about these things until they're decided, which is great. I like it that way. And all sorts of ideas went through my mind, right? Because resistance, if you can, as you might imagine, has lots of themes depending on sort of what realm we're talking about. There's the medical realm, where resistance is very clearly defined in microbiology and infectious diseases, right? And maybe we'll hear some stories about that. There's, of course, the political, social realm, where there's a lot of discussion around resistance. There's a lot of quasi-debate about it, unclear kind of how much dialogue is occurring. So it'd be interesting to hear whether we have stories related to that type of resistance. And then I'm sure there's a few other ways you can think of resistance that I can't think of just yet. So let's listen for those, and then let's figure out kind of what we can make out of those themes tonight and carry forward from today. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Josh Connor. He's an intern in family and community medicine at UCSF in San Francisco General, and a graduate of the UCSF School of Medicine. He also has an MPH in maternal and child health from UC Berkeley, where he focused on women's access to healthcare in prisons. His clinical interests include HIV care, family planning, and minor procedures. His broader interests include building social movements, abolishing prisons, and spending as much time as possible with his 10-month-old daughter, born conveniently 2 weeks into intern year. Welcome, Josh Connor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I brought my water because my throat is a little scratchy, so hopefully this will work out okay. Tonight I'm going to talk about my involvement with the hunger strike about a year ago, the Frisco Five, who were part of a large movement against police violence in San Francisco specifically and around the country, kind of coming along with the wave of the Black Lives Matter movement as well. I did have some clinical involvement with caring for the hunger strikers, but I'm more going to talk about the social movement aspect of it rather than the clinical side of it. But I guess where it started for me is way back at the age of 9. One of my first memories of being aware of social realities of structural racism was during and after the Rodney King beating and the trial and verdict that came from that. And also the uprising in LA, as well as Oakland, where I lived as a kid. It was one of the first times that I was aware of the fact that power can shape the narrative, and that what the media presents to us isn't necessarily always exactly what was actually happening on the ground. So that's just a little bit of background in terms of my perspective. And I also wanted to kind of open and share a quote, kind of thinking about the theme tonight, from Che Guevara, who said, "For one to be a revolutionary doctor, or to be a revolutionary at all, there must first be a revolution." And I'll talk a little bit about what that means to me. But the hunger strike I initially heard about because they came to Clínica Martín Baró, which is in the Mission, one of the student-run clinics, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And it's run primarily by SF State students who do all the logistical work and a lot of the support work, and then UCSF students who staff it on the medical side. And they had come to the clinic basically to have a checkup a few days into the hunger strike, and I wasn't there that day. But I heard about it, and then there was a request that some of us, I was finishing med school, that some of us students come down to the camp that they had outside the Mission Police Station and just check up on them, and also, just to provide support. And some of it, it's very direct support, checking vital signs, blood pressure, making sure that they had water and resources available. But also it's a symbolic thing. So, being able to sort of speaking from our position as physicians, as students, to be able to publicly show our support at the camp. And so that was how I first got involved. I went down there, I saw where they were sleeping in their tents, and there was a lot of supporters there right outside the police station. And we went tent to tent in the morning and helped check their vital signs and reported back to kind of a central committee and doctors who were kind of following their care. And that's how I got involved. I also wanted to read the names of the hunger strikers, because I think it's important to recognize their individual contributions as well. So Maria Cristina Gutierrez, Iliak Sato, Selassie Blackwell, Ike Pinkston, and Edwin Lindo were the 5 hunger strikers. Obviously supported by a huge community. And I think they did a lot to kind of galvanize the thinking in the city, and they had specific demands, one of which was for the chief of police to resign, but they also had a broader perspective about structural racism and police violence. And I think the piece that we brought was the idea that these issues, that structural racism and police violence, are public health issues. And it really made me think a lot about the word radical in the context of primary care, and to me, the word itself, radical, means to keep looking for the root of things, and that's exactly what we do in primary care as well. When we see a patient, there might be a presenting symptom, but we're trained to always look further to see what's underlying that, and how can we go deeper to address the root causes. And I really see the same issue with police violence. There's a symptom that we see, which is somebody being killed by the police, and often black and brown individuals are more likely to face that violence. And then, we have to keep going deeper to realize that there's these underlying systems, including capitalism, the economic forces, structural racism. Those things are underlying these symptoms. So that was sort of how I came into it. I really, it came at a point at the end of 4th year of medicine, med school, where we do have a little bit more time available, and so to me it kind of converged with a time when I could actually, be down there at the camp and provide that support. And then the real crux of it came for me when they asked us to join them in a march to City Hall, and just prior to that, the mayor had come to the camp unannounced and had a big media spectacle where he wanted to show that he was in dialogue with the hunger strikers, but he didn't tell them he was coming, and he kind of made this big show where he sat there and said that they were refusing to talk to him. And then I think it was the next day or in the next couple days after that, which was, I believe, day 13 of their hunger strike, when they decided to march from the Mission Police Station to City Hall, and asked us to join them. And so, I've been to quite a few marches. I thought, we'll go down there. We'll probably just follow up in the rear and join the march. When we got there, they had some wheelchairs available because they had gone 13 days without eating, and they were, quite weak in terms of being able to walk. I think it's 3 miles from the Mission Police Station to City Hall. And they asked if we would put our white coats on and push their wheelchairs, which was not the role I was expecting to play. I thought we'd be, somewhere in the back just supporting them. And so we put our white coats on and we pushed their wheelchairs for 3 miles, which is surprisingly difficult. Under the hot sun, we all needed to pay attention to our own hydration as well. But it was an incredibly moving experience. Over the years, I've been to quite a few actions and marches, and I think this is one of the most moving for me, to feel like I was using my role as a physician in training symbolically and physically to actually move people from their camp to City Hall, and then to arrive at City Hall and see hundreds of people there who had marched with us and who met us there, waiting to welcome the hunger strikers and the movement that they were part of. And there was a moment when, we arrived with the wheelchairs across the big courtyard from City Hall, and the entire crowd parted for us to push the hunger strikers through. And we just walked slowly and saw these hundreds of people lining this courtyard. It's hard for me to even describe what that felt like. And I just felt incredibly grateful to be there in that moment, to use the role that I have in that particular way. And then, from there, the movement continued. Obviously, the hunger strike continued for a few more days after that. It was obvious that the hunger strike was taking a toll on the strikers, and eventually, in the next few days after that, the community actually got together, the community that had been supporting the hunger strikers, and went through a process where they asked the hunger strikers to end the strike in support of a larger goal of continuing organizing for the same goals that they had had in the strike, but that we didn't want their lives to be sacrificed at that time. And I think they, from everything that I could tell from working with them and knowing them, I think they would have continued the strike if they hadn't been asked by their own community to end it. And at the time, when they did end it on day 17 of the strike, as far as I know, none of the specific demands had yet been met. But the organizing continued, and another moment when we were able to kind of show up specifically as health professionals and medical students was a few days later. There was a police commission meeting, and they have them, they rotate them around to different neighborhoods, and so it was in a school in Chinatown, and they knew we were coming, and we had planned to disrupt the meeting, and the background of it was that the community had been asking them for many, many weeks and months to just put the issue of police leadership on the agenda, and they refused to do that. And every time they would sort of use the kind of tricks of democracy to say, well, the agenda is already set, we're not allowed to change it during the meeting, so therefore you need to wait till the next meeting, and then they would just do the same thing again. And so we thought this is a specific way where we can use some of the privilege that we have as healthcare professionals to show up and to subvert that narrative. So our intention was to interrupt the meeting at some point. We didn't know exactly when. When we got there, there was an incredible piece of political theater where they had these students who were presenting awards and thank yous to the police commissioners. And so that took up probably the first hour of the meeting, where the kids were reading stuff and telling stories and giving these awards. And if we had interrupted them, it would have been like a bunch of adults interrupting these little kids doing a school presentation, basically. So it was very uncomfortable, and we had to kind of think on our feet, and we were whispering back and forth, trying to figure out, should we interrupt? When should we interrupt? What should we do? And it all kind of happened on the fly, but we basically waited for the students to finish, and they actually mostly left with their parents. And at that point, we did stand up and use our voices to basically just ask the police commission, will you put this issue on the agenda? And they refused to the point of adjourning the meeting temporarily, left the room, came back. We thought maybe we had had some movement and maybe they would put this on the agenda. And basically they just came back in order to scold us for breaking the rules of the meeting, and said if we didn't sit down, then they would just adjourn the meeting permanently. I think in those moments it feels, at least for me, it felt difficult to look at these adults who I think should have some respect for the community, but to step outside of the normal rules of interaction. I tend to be, I think I'm a pretty mellow person. I don't like yelling at people. I don't like having confrontation, but to use it strategically in that moment, there was a role for interruption and for strategic conflict. And then to be, even in our role, with a lot of respect that we have, to be basically scolded and told that we were acting like children, just, I guess, gave me a small taste of what the community had been facing for months at that point. So that commission meeting happened, and then the very next morning, we heard that another young woman had been killed by the police, Jessica Williams, sorry. And then the police chief finally did resign. And you know, I think while the initial demands when the hunger strike ended hadn't yet been met, I don't think that would have happened if it weren't for the work that they did and the work that the community had been doing really for years leading up to that. He had 22 police shootings while he was police chief, and it was this last one that finally got him to resign. And really that was just the first of many demands, and I think the work has continued since then. On our side, I think an incredible amount of work went into specifically the support going into the hunger strike, but then also starting some new organizations, including the Do No Harm Coalition. A lot of people were already involved with White Coats for Black Lives and continued that work. And then in the community, the work has continued both around the specific families and community members of people who have been killed, and then also around the larger demands of making that structural change. And so also I wanted to read just the names of 5 of the people in the last couple of years who have been killed by police violence, who sadly motivated a lot of this action. So Alex Nieto, Amilcar Perez Lopez, Mario Woods, Luis Gongora Pap, and Jessica Williams. And then just kind of going back to the quote that I opened with, it's been something that I carried with me through medical school, that I kind of used to ground myself. To me, the idea that in order to be a revolutionary doctor, there has to first be a revolution, doesn't necessarily mean, oh, we can't be revolutionary until a certain number of changes have been made in society, or until we win power, or some moment when that happens. To me, it means more that we have to be more than just working as individuals in our clinic or in our hospital with an individual patient. We have to always kind of be thinking about that word radical, about searching for the root cause of things, and we have to use our role in society to push for that change on a larger scale. So it's not enough to just practice medicine as an individual. We have to be part of a community. We have to always be thinking about how can I use the role that I have to press for the social change that we need, especially around the issues of structural racism, police violence, economics, including capitalism. How can we change these systems that are not benefiting our patients, our communities, or ourselves? So that's, I kind of carry that quote with me. I'll continue to carry it with me in the years to come. I'm just finishing intern year now in the next month, so still a long way to go in terms of training and learning. But this has been a huge part of my education over the last year or two, being involved in this story. So thank you.
Wow, Josh, thank you so much for such a sobering opening to our evening. There's so many words that I scribbled down while you were talking. I have to say, I'll start with an image though. The image of the crowd parting as you approached City Hall, pushing the wheelchairs of the protesters. That in your white coats, I mean, that's sort of, if you pull that all together, it just lots of potentially conflicting images there, right? The medicine is not known for being revolutionary, although there are revolutionary discoveries in medicine. But as physicians, as healthcare professionals, we get to where we go because we follow rules. So to have stepped out of that at that part of your career is a statement. So congratulations on heeding that message within yourself, and recognizing the privilege, even as a student, that you bear, and what power lies beneath that. So it just made me think of, if I had to add to the resistance wall, resistance is unexpected. When your opportunity will present itself, and when the fruits of your struggle will be realized. You don't really ever know, right? But you sometimes decide that the call is too loud not to listen to it. So thank you for setting that example for us. So let's go on to our next speaker. Happy to introduce Tiny, aka Lisa Gray Garcia. She is a formerly unhoused, incarcerated poverty scholar, revolutionary journalist, lecturer, poet, and welfare queen. Single mama of Tiburcio, daughter of a houseless, disabled Mama D, and co-founder of Poor magazine, Prensa Pobre, Poor News Network. She founded Escuela de la Gente, People School, a poor and indigenous people-led school, as well as the Poets Project. You're challenging my pronunciation here. Welfare Queen and the Theater of the Poor, to name a few. She is also the author of Criminal of Poverty, Growing Up Homeless in America, and co-editor of A Decolonizer's Guide to a Humble Revolution, born and raised in Frisco. Her second book will be released in 2017. Welcome, Tiny.
Anthropology, ethnography, psychology, the study about us, without us. Anthropology, ethnography, psychology, the study about us, without us. Our spirits, our cultures, our traditions through your lens. Deconstructing our struggles where our communities are dismantled and left in rubble, acquired with academic privilege, linguistic domination gifts, long ago parsed out to the sorted and separated who succeeded in Ameri-KKK school systems, the myth of inclusion and the cult of independence. How are you going to fly to Nicaragua, Bangladesh, and Oakland and take photographic essays of gente pobre the world over, but not so much as give us a slice of your academic privilege and access? So I've got a new kind of gift. It's called poverty scholarship. And it includes our brotherships, our fellowships, our sisterships. It includes all of our gifts. So I want to start tonight with a prayer for all the people who aren't here. When the young folks started tonight out, they asked who was this and who was that. I'm a patient, I'm a consumer. I'm the people that you probably, or maybe if I was lucky, you might have given me a little bit of Medi-Cal, or Medi-Hell as us welfare queens call it, or HELLTH, care, when we were up in UCSF. There's some conscious doctors in this room who are about to be conscious, I know that. And then there's some folks who went along with it when your supervising physician said, discharge that elder when they have pneumonia. And so they die on the streets. So I want to start tonight out with everybody who can, standing up for all the people who aren't here. First of all, for the Ohlone Lishan peoples who upon land we are humbly standing, and who long ago suffered the violence of colonization or gentrification. I want to honor them first and foremost, and then I want to honor all the poor people, the black and brown and unhoused, disabled, and living with the disability people who aren't here. So if I can ask you to rise, it's not a metaphor. It's survival. And again, only if you can. We practice eldership. Thank you, Creator, for another day of life, and thank you, ancestors upon the land we're standing. Thank you to the ancestors of these young people in this room who are trying to decolonize their minds from the lies of capitalist ideas and eyes who say that our lives don't matter and other people's do. I want to thank you for all your hearts in this room and for the ancestors watching over those hearts. And I want to thank Mother Earth, for which, without whom, we could not be. Oh, thank you, everybody. I am a poverty scholar, that houseless mama, that houseless daughter. I am a poverty scholar. I am a poverty scholar. All the people you don't want to be, never want to see, look away from me, what you going to do, arrest me. I'm in your city. I am a poverty scholar, and I rock this jailhouse attire because me and my po mama did jail time just trying to stay alive and housed in this holler. I am a poverty scholar, the melanin-challenged daughter of a strong, affable, equal mama, for without whom there would be no me, a mama soltera and a welfare queen. So that's what we call our slam bio at the Poets Project of Poor Magazine. Thank you for trying to wrap your mouth around all of our Ebonics, Creole, Pidgin, and all of the languages that are called illiterate by the people who run institutions like this. Yes, I did say illiterate. The concept of illiteracy of what language? How do people like yourselves get into spaces like this? It's called organizational privilege. It's one of the things I teach on at People School. Somebody made sure, your mama, your auntie, your grandma, or all of them together, your village made sure that you had a roof over your head and food in your belly and clothes on your back so that you could fill out those millions and millions of applications and get into thousands of dollars worth of debt, or maybe just get paid to be here. And so I want you to hold that, and I know that you are. And I heard the beautiful words of Josh, and all you folks in this room, I know you're conscious and you're trying to liberate from the many lies of what I call the away nation. How many of y'all live at home with your mamas and your daddies, your uncles, your abuelos? How many? Thank you for being good daughters. Thank you. Can I get any other good daughters or sons in the audience? Man, I'm not saying that's your fault. You've all been lied to from the gate. You've all been told by age grade separated schools in other spaces and places, or you've been bought and sold and pimped and played on the American dream to come here and make it, and if I get this paper, I'll be okay. So then you can be a provider to people like me. And you can make decisions of life and death. So I want to challenge that in all of you. I want to recognize that your first teachers are the people who made you, the people who gave you love and gave you that roof. And even though you might have bought into the cult of angst when you were a teenager and you wouldn't want to hang out with your parents because they're not cool, the reality is they gave you the strength to be here. And this society will tell you the exact opposite of that. And that's what builds the institution of separation. So again, I want to honor and love the beautiful people in this room who are actually trying to be different. And I want to tell you my story. Because I come from a mama who was a mixed race orphan, arguably one of the most dangerous things to be anywhere in the world is an unprotected child. Her body was abused physically and sexually over 210 times by the time she was 2 years old. That she continued to go on, pull herself up, decided to ascend to whiteness, because that was rightness. Get with my colonizer dad, have me. Those were all the things that continued to have her life happen. But that didn't mean she was okay. And when I was 11, it was necessary that I drop out of the formal institutions of learning and enroll full-time in the School of Hard Knocks, where I am proud to say I graduated with a PhD in poverty. But I ended up in the emergency room when I was 18 with no health care and having to lie or whatever, tell a story like tonight maybe to get health care. How many of y'all feel me now? Y'all know, right? Can I get a witness?
Yeah.
Y'all know what I'm talking about. So let's be truth tellers tonight and liberators. Because the reality is these systems set up us to be criminals, or what they design as criminals, right? And so in our situation, We made it by any means necessary, selling on the street, making art, doing whatever, without a license, without money. It wasn't that we weren't hard workers. People call us, people like us, lazy and stupid and crazy and all these other fetishized words. We were one of the hardest working families I know. And just like other families in the global south all over, stuck in a groove of survival, of poverty, and a vicious cycle of criminalization, basically never to get out, no matter how many different things we tried to do. Takes money to make money, all those things are true. So anyway, and when I was 18, as well as ending up in the emergency room with no health care and telling a story to get it, I also ended up in jail. And I did 3 months hard time in Santa Rita County Jail for the act of being houseless. How many of y'all know it's illegal to be houseless in the U.S.? Can I get a witness? Now, they don't say it's illegal. They don't actually have it written in the settler colonizer law books like that, it's illegal to be homeless. They just have about 350 laws that make the act of sitting, standing, walking, while poor, while a person of color, while an elder, while disabled, a crime. And in our case, it was sleeping in our car, sleeping in doorways, sleeping in whatever. And so, yeah, those tickets, they piled up, and there was no way to pay them. So we ended up outside, and it was because of the act of a revolutionary lawyer that I stand before you. There's 3 interventions, and then I'll end. I'll give you a little taste. I know my time. Basically, who saw that it was impossible and I was in a sea of impossibility, and actually offered the possibility of writing to me, someone who had never considered themselves a writer. So again, navigating that privilege in those spaces, right? The next one was a landlord who didn't evict us the first time we didn't have money for rent. So any of y'all are children of landlords. Those kinds of things really matter. Mm-hmm. And the last one was the act of getting published. So there's a lot of things, but then and the very last one was becoming conscious and recognizing the relationships between poor families all over the world, which allowed my mom and myself and my little sister to come up and out of unconsciousness and build What is Poor magazine. Check us out. We're doing the Stolen Land Hoarded Resources Tour. The other ways that I want to push back on y'all is we have a project called Homefulness in Deep East Wichino, Lonely Land, and we need to start a poor people's health clinic. And I didn't say involved with an HMO. I said y'all just giving services because you can. And we also do our Stolen Land Hoarded Resources Tour, where we go up to wealth hoarders and offer them the medicine of redistribution. The next one's on Juneteenth in Miwok County, aka Marin. Hit me up if you want to come. We appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for that. I wouldn't dare know how to describe what you said and how, because it's so personally your experience. But I did note what kind of space we created here tonight, or we're creating as we go. How often do you sit in a dyad between a provider and a patient? We're all learning, we're all practicing that, and all the unscripted rules that guide that conversation. Even when we think we have a connection and a relationship, do we really know that person on the other side? And what they carry with them, what they have to stuff away in order to make it through the visit to get their needs met. And so how can these types of dialogues continue and flourish within the constraints of the institutions that we either work for or come to receive care in? So thanks for raising that question for us tonight. So we have one more storyteller before our intermission. I want to bring up Dr. Bill Shore. He is now Emeritus Professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, and he practiced medicine for 50 years at urban underserved clinics, including the South of Market Health Center and the Family Health Center at San Francisco General. He is a longtime advocate for family medicine, has been a director of medical education at the UCSF Department of Family and Community Medicine for 25 years, and faculty within the Family Medicine Residency Program at San Francisco General. Welcome, Bill Shore.
Thank you all. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you for sharing your story. It's going to be a hard act to follow. Actually, just to digress a little bit before I get into my patient story, Josh was talking about revolution, and I'm just still on a high from just getting back from the 50th anniversary celebration of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine. We were described as a revolutionary movement 50 years ago when some of the people who were our mentors led that movement, and we heard a lot of the same kind of language and talk that we're hearing tonight. So this movement is going on. And actually, Andrew Singer Morrison from Primary Care Progress was the first keynote speaker, really lit up the audience of a huge number of people at the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine. So keep that in your future as you progress through medical school. So it's really a delight to be here. And I'm going to have a patient story. And it's a story of patient resistance, resilience, and perseverance. So this was a patient I met a long time ago when I was shortly after I finished my residency, when I was working at a family health center clinic in the inner city. And the patient was transferred to me and described to me as this is an impossible patient. She's never going to change. Nothing's ever going to work. Those of us who work as providers know that story. And she should not be given to a resident. She's just going to be too difficult, never going to make any progress with her. So that was my introduction to this patient. She was a 45-year-old woman who had multiple chronic illnesses, and in the first several visits with her, she avoided any eye contact. She had a lot of, as I mentioned, multiple chronic illnesses, visual impairment, and made no eye contact for quite a long time, actually, in our relationship. The first several visits, she was worn out, tired, would, again, not make any eye contact, and would kind of answer any questions in single words, and didn't want to go into any detail. As I get to know her, I learned that she had had many difficult experiences in her life. She had mothered 4 children who were then teenagers and young adults. But when they were younger, some of her children had been removed by the welfare system, and she had very negative feelings about the social service system, and did not want anything to do with the social services at that point. She also was worried about becoming homeless because one of her teenage children who was involved with drugs had depleted her bank account after he got a hold of her bank card. She actually was homeless for various times and lived in a car, as you said you did, with her 4 or 5 grandchildren, and would sometimes shelter them in her car until she was able to get more housing or get some kind of housing and get back into public housing. Over the years, as I started to see her, even though the contact seemed to be very slow and I was frustrated, I realized at some point that she was actually keeping every appointment that I had with her, so she came very regularly. I then started seeing her grandchildren, as in medicine we can see entire families, and began to develop relationships with them, became part of their lives, and realized that she was opening up more. And after about 2 or 3 years, she actually started making eye contact with me, which I found a very big, significant step. She had several hospitalizations for chronic illnesses and recurrent episodes of depression, some suicidal ideation, which she sometimes told me that she used that as a way that she knew that she could escape the situation, her home situation, be hospitalized for a few days, and then get discharged when she said she was suicidal. At one point, we talked about maybe there could be another way of addressing that, of working with the situations. Okay. Thanks. And So then after one hospitalization, I got a call from our very energetic and compassionate social worker who said he had gotten a call from the housing authority police and that she had taken over a house in one of the projects. So the housing authority police went to her house to evict her or arrest her. She stood in the doorway. She wasn't going anyplace. She made that clear to the housing authority police. And then she said, look around you. Look at the other houses in this neighborhood. They all have bullet holes, broken windows, in disrepair, and not painted. In the time she had been in this house, she had actually had it fixed up. So it looked very different from the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. The housing authority police looked around. They saw the other houses. They looked at her. And they said, you're right. They left. She lived in that house for years and years and raised generations of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren in that same house that she continued to keep up. And what that story always meant to me, what she told me, what I learned from her, is that this act of resistance, as well as finally identifying her inner strengths, really gave her power to take charge of her life and start to make some differences and changes. It was her inner strength. I probably had minimal to do with it. But I've used this story many times with students and residents and other faculty members and peer clinicians about trying to stay with patients and help them find their inner strength and help them get the power. And this was really a power story of supreme resistance. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts that I had while I was listening to your story. Well, actually, the first starts with the impossible patient. And we have community members here, so I think we can air a little bit of our dirty laundry about the ways that we are acculturated to talk about people in sort of stereotypes, right? The impossible patient, non-compliant patient. Now the politically correct way is to say non-adherent, like, as if that's any better. But and you difficult patient, right? A situation of that nature, and it's interesting. You could deconstruct why we do that, why we use that shorthand, and I think the hard part about it is no matter how conscious we are to try to not be biased by those labels, we can't help but sort of seep in there somewhere. And how do you walk into a situation where you're kind of walking in with a stance of just waiting for what you've been primed to expect? So anyway, thanks for sticking with it, right? Because someone who's not making eye contact with you is not answering fully your questions, doesn't seem to be making much change. Some people would say this person's impossible and just kind of throw up their hands. The other part is, I think there's an interesting chemistry between providers and patients. And the chemistry goes something like this. When does a series of interactions, connections with a patient make you, as a provider, aware of your privilege? And what does that compel you to do for them, right? And how does that feel? Does the privilege feel comfortable? Does it feel a little uncomfortable because you're sitting across from someone whose life you, as you were saying, don't want to know fully about, don't want to live, and yet you're confronted with that story. And yet the only way to turn privilege into power in some ways, good power, is to feel uncomfortable about the privilege and have it compel you to do something different. And then and then the chemistry on the other hand is, how does a person who has faced much adversity and not recognize oftentimes has forgotten or never learned their sense of self-worth, how does your discomfort become a place of vulnerability for them to kind of emerge into their own? So thank you for sharing that. So we're going to take a break. If you've been writing on your sticky notes, now's the time to go put those sticky notes on the Resistance Is wall. If not, write some more, put them on there, write some more at the end, we'll pass them up front, we'll read through a bunch at the beginning of our second half, and at the end, there's more food and drink, and we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Yeah? Okay. So welcome back. It's always great to see all the connection and conversation going on out there, but we still have stories to tell. So, welcome back to the second half. I collected about 25 or so Post-it notes on the banner in the back. So I'm going to go through a few of them now. Please continue to fill out the Post-its. We'll make a last call to send up Post-its at the end of the evening so that you can have your voice represented. So I knew someone was going to help me remember the third meaning or concept or domain of resistance. It's called physics and electromagnetism. So I did not like physics, so that's why I didn't remember it. I almost didn't make it to medical school because of how little I liked it. Okay, so, but seriously, not that Ohm's law is not serious. I still remember that. Okay. Resistance is bravery in the face of oppression, solidarity and building bridges, always questioning, productive anger, speaking up, constant education, quiet and loud, seen and unseen, saying no to passivity and yes to justice. And I'll stop with this one. Resistance means loving myself when society tells me I shouldn't. And we'll hear more of these. These are very powerful statements. Thanks for contributing those. So, to our storytellers. We move on to the second half with Alexa Madrid. She's a Consumer Advisory Panel member representative for Tenderloin Health Services, formerly known as Glide Health Services, I believe. She is also a musician with 8 recorded CDs. Originally from Houston, she's been living in San Francisco for 6 years and loves it here. Welcome, Alexa.
Well, welcome everybody. I just wanted to mention that on my way up here today, I passed a karate school. It's a martial arts school over here on Irving, I believe it was. And it kind of reminded me of the story that I'm going to tell today, because it talks about my first karate class that I took. Actually, it was judo. They called it judo back then. This was 1967. And in 1967, judo was the craze because they had the movies out. The James Bond movies were just coming out, and it was a big deal to be a kid back then because you had karate and you had all these toy weapons that the secret agents used and all this sort of thing. So at the time, my dad was also in the military, so it was rather emphasized for me because my dad really kind of pushed this kind of thing on us. And so I just wanted to let you know that I was brought up in a macho culture, first of all. That's one of the key things of what I'm going to tell you today. And we were stationed in Bern, Switzerland at the time because he worked for the American Embassy. He was a military attaché, and we would travel around every 2 or 3 years. They'd send us to different places around the world, which is really nice, as a kid. But it also uproots you, so you're kind of like a gypsy. So at this particular time, I was going to school at the English-speaking school in Bern, and that only went up to the 8th grade. It had an English curriculum, like a USA curriculum, and my parents had 2 choices at this point when I went to 9th grade. They could either ship me back to the States to live with my aunt in Kentucky, and or they could send me over to Montreux, Switzerland, which is about 200 miles away, and go to boarding school. So they thought it over and they said, well, we don't really want to send you back to the States because there's all these hippies there and everything's going crazy. You know, it's just nuts. Things are so loose in the States right now. We'd rather be where it's sort of close and we can keep an eye on it. And, you know, I'm transgender, of course, as I was brought up as a boy. And so they sent me to the boarding school, and I was sent there mid-year, so this is about November-ish is when I started. And one of the first things that I had to do was sign up for martial arts class. Back then it was called judo, it wasn't martial arts yet. But I was so psyched up for it because I was James Bond. And I wanted to do this. So all of the kids that were in the James Bond class, we had to get in our little gi outfits and we would file in for breakfast, you know, all in our little outfits like this, and we'd sit at the same breakfast table and eat breakfast. So since I was new and I didn't know any better, you know, I'm sitting there at breakfast time just chowing down and eating, filling myself up. And I noticed like a lot of the other guys, they weren't eating very much, but I said, well, whatever, you know, I'm eating. So then we march on over to the gym to do our first class, and the master, as he was called, really our gym teacher. He went and he paired us all off. So I'm paired off, I was 13, so I'm probably about this tall. I was paired off with an 8th grader, probably about this tall. So I figured this is going to be easy. You know, how difficult is this going to be to go up against this kid? You know, and then we get up there on the mat, and I'm ready to go, you know, in my mind, James Bond, up against the little kid. And we go up and ready to rumble, and the kid takes me and grabs my jacket and just flips me, and as he's flipping me, does a puncheroo right in my gut. And I could just feel my breakfast as I was falling. And, you know, I was just totally sick. So I said to the master, I said, oh, God, can I go see the school nurse? I've got to see the school nurse. He said, no, you wait till after class, and I got to talk to you. So I felt, something's going to happen. So after class, I go talk to the master, right? So the master goes and talks to me and says, you know, Alex, this is what you're doing wrong. He says, let me explain something to you. He says, here's what you're doing now. He says, I'm not doing anything wrong. I said, you got it all wrong. He says, this kid, you know, he wasn't doing things right. You know, he hit me and he's like, I had breakfast and I'm making all these excuses for what I'm doing. And so I'm basically doing what? I'm resisting. Okay. And the master, he said, no, this is what you're doing right now. So put your hand up. So the master puts his hand up. Okay, now this is this muscular, you know, big guy. And this adult, and then this little kid, and I put my hand up, and I press as hard as you can. So I'm pressing against this brick wall, basically, as hard as I can, and nothing's happening. And I go, so what, master? You know, I can't press against you. So what? Okay. Now this is what you should be doing, Alex. He says, I press again. So I press again, and he just lets go, and I go flying. He says, that's what you should be doing, just like this. And if you had done that when the kid hit you, you would have gone flying and you wouldn't be losing your breakfast all over the mat like you did. You would have just gone flying when he pulled your jacket and you would have just gone with him and gone with the flow. We call that the resistance roll. You just roll with the resistance. And it's a principle that, you know, really stuck in my head to this day because of the physical fact that I lost my breakfast. And also the fact that it's just something that, you know, really is so true. Even as a kid, I realized that this is a shining moment in my life. So then he let me go to the nurse. So then I go to the nurse, and I'm sitting there with the nurse, and, you know, this is the thing, in a boarding school, this particular boarding school, I wound up having to stay there all through the summers, too, because my parents, they kind of liked the idea of having one less kid to deal with. So they kept me there for 3 years. I went to this school, summers too. So this nurse kind of became like my mother, my surrogate mother. So I confided in her, and she was the primary care clinician for this school, basically. And, you know, I told her things that I would normally confide in my mother, and sort of looked at her like my mom. And it was her that I started revealing the first ideas that I was questioning whether or not I was a boy or if I was a girl. I didn't really know in my mind, but I didn't know how to describe it to her. I knew that something was wrong because, you know, I had girlfriends at school, but nothing was really happening from it like it was with my other friends, my other guy friends. With them, it was real comfortable and they got along well with their girlfriends and everything happened very naturally. But for me, I had to really work at it. And it just wasn't working out right. It would just, I'd have a girlfriend and we'd stay together for a while, but then it just sort of fizzled out. And it just wasn't happening naturally for me. And with her, I sort of kept talking about this with her, and she said, you know, maybe there's something else going on here that you haven't thought about. And she said, she talked to me about this lady named Christine Jorgensen, who at the time was the first trans woman that in the United States that had actually had transsexual surgery. And I didn't know about it. She says, well, you know, this is something you might want to think about, that this is another possibility that hasn't even crossed your mind. You might look at this. Think about maybe this is like something that might be in your mind. And I said, no, this isn't me. I read about it and I looked it up and studied the subject. This is not me. So I started resisting it. And then I buried it in my mind and put it away because this is something that I did not want to have happen. And I kept going to her because she was a school nurse, but my relationship with her changed because I looked at her as the person that was the one that knew too much about me now. Because she really did know me well. And if we take this and we fast forward it 40-odd years into the future, after 3 failed marriages of varying lengths, same situation. It was like my wives were like kind of like girlfriends instead of being real wives. You know, I did love them, but what happened was they failed because it wasn't really like we were in love with each other as much as in love with the idea of being in love. And they just sort of fell apart on their own. And the last marriage that I had, we were going to see a counselor together. And the counselor finally said that, she didn't know what she could do for us together as a couple. And she said that what she wanted to do was to see us individually. And what happened was my wife finally left me. And what I did at the last minute before she left me was, I said, well, we need to see about maybe my looking into getting some counseling for my dysphoria, which is, dysphoria is this feeling of being a man trapped in a woman's body. So that is the end of my resistance there. I started to roll with the resistance finally after decades and decades. So, all of the little sayings that you've been putting up on this board about strength and all these things, these all could be like tattoos that you could put on me right now. Because these are all truths for me that really hit home because it's reality for me. because I have rolled with the resistance, and I'm here to tell you people that it's a reality that if you do these things that you have written on the board, that your lives will be much richer and fuller for doing so. Anyway, that's all I have to say to you.
Thank you, Alexa. You've sort of opened up a whole other realm, right? A lot of what we've talked about in the first half of our evening together is how you resist something external. You push back to something external because you know it's right, because what's the status quo is wrong, or for survival, right? But there it's about constraints of forces outside of you. And what you've described is internal resistance. And as many struggles have gone on, political and social struggles that have gone on for decades and centuries, depending on what part of the world we're talking about, they can last decades within oneself, and all of the strife that exists inside. And to be able as providers to kind of have a window on that and understand that you see, the person you see in front of you doesn't tell you the whole story of all the tension and the struggles and the pushes and pulls inside. And how do we ask the questions? What stance do we take? What posture do we take to allow that person to do some of that pushing and pulling out in the open? And you had a great gift in the person that, your school nurse, who allowed you that opportunity, and yet you still needed to go through your process. And how do we, as providers, not get frustrated with patients when they don't seem to be doing the right thing or what we think would be the right thing for them? It's not passivity. It's often a very dynamic struggle inside. So thanks for giving such a personal story to enlighten us to this. Thank you. So our final speaker for the evening is Dr. Tanya Chafee. I got it right.
And no one would be offended if you said it differently.
Okay. She completed pediatric residency, chief residency, and subspecialty fellowship training in adolescent medicine at UCSF. She then completed an academic fellowship in violence prevention and earned an MPH at UC Berkeley. Currently, she is a clinical professor of pediatrics for UCSF, medical director of the Child and Adolescent Support Advocacy and Resource Center, which is the Sexual Assault Center for San Francisco, and director of the Teen and Young Adult Health Center at CSFG. She runs electives for pediatric residents on adolescent reproductive health and child-adolescent physical and sexual abuse. She is passionate about advancing the education of providers in caring for adolescents and young adults, with a particular emphasis for underserved youth populations, including immigrant, foster care, incarcerated, and LGBT youth. Welcome, Tanya Chafee.
Thank you very much. It's sort of an honor, I think, especially after the previous speakers tonight. It's interesting because I had to do a grand rounds, which is, I think, a little theme of the resistance for me is finding your passion. And I work with a lot of residents, and sometimes you have to do projects. And you have to do projects when you're really tired or whatever. And if you're not passionate about it, you're not going to do it. And I think all of you are in the room because you had some sort of passion about health. You know, you put it on your resumes and whatnot. And believe me, some of us have to read those resumes. There we go again. But it was interesting because I thought a little about this when I was invited, and then I kind of came back to it tonight. When you hear your kind of resume read out, it's sort of, it doesn't really tell you the person that's kind of in front of you. So I am like a product of the resistance. So I was born here at UCSF, right over there. I had APGARs of 4 and 8, so there you go. I had a knot in my umbilical cord, but I survived. So, and my parents, they lived in Berkeley. I was born, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm 50 years old, so it was 1966, summer of love kind of thing. And as a little side story, I broke my arm, and we couldn't go to hospital for 2 days because there was a Vietnam War protest going on in Telegraph where Alta Bates was. So that's broke my arm. They gave you aspirin then. Babies got aspirin, so I got aspirin. But fast forward, the two biggest teachers in my life actually were my parents, growing up in Berkeley, and they actually moved to Phoenix, Arizona, so that was a contrast. And my mother went to school at the age of 40-ish and got her degree in social work. And so she was learning all about child abuse. And she even had her books and everything when I was an adolescent myself on child abuse. And I would look at them, like cigarette burns and actual pictures of sexual abuse. And she became a social worker at Planned Parenthood. And she would talk about, at the dinner table, we would have dinner and she would talk about, I had this 13-year-old who was raped by her father and she's, pregnant now. What do we do about this? So these were the things that I kind of grew up with. I guess for me it was, okay, this is what you talk about at the dinner table. My dad actually, it's interesting because I'm a second generation primary care doc. He trained here. I think his picture's up there somewhere. But he was in the old school, you guys probably don't know this, but there was no such thing as hospitalists. There didn't exist. When you were primary care, you had on call and you went in and you admitted whoever that night and you did the paperwork and then you would follow up with them the next day. And there's many a story about, I remember he came home one night just really distraught because he had a woman that he'd seen once before who was a heroin addict, who was admitted, who was pregnant, and she passed away. So yeah, it's one of those things where this was kind of what I grew up with and thought was sort of normal. So actually my dad really made me not want to go into medicine at all, to be honest. I was thinking landscape architect. I had the kind of science brain, I knew that. And it wasn't really until I kind of came here to San Francisco and kind of learned what my earlier childhood was all about and we came back as a family to the Bay Area. And it's so interesting now in this day and age of where we are, but where I found my passion is from, I can't even begin to think of a patient because I asked my dad one day, what does it mean to be practicing? They say that, you're practicing. When are you practiced? When you're done. It's like, you're not. Because that's the thing, and you're not. You're always learning, and I came out of training here and I felt, a little insecure, but I think the most rewarding thing, and I'm biased because I do primary care. Okay, full disclosure, you heard I'm a subspecialist, but I primarily take care of young people, adolescents. And that was my passion. That was my passion, I won't get into all that, but I really felt like young people are an age where you can really connect with them. Now, what I've learned in my own discipline, there's people who hate teenagers and people who are cuckoo nuts like me and love them. But it is a challenge, and one of my mentors told me, and this is sort of, how to really, how do you know when you're doing a job? How do you know when you're really helping people? How do you know when you can make a difference? And I think all of you in the room, that's probably what you wrote in your little resumes and CVs. I want to help people, I want to make a difference. And I think the most powerful thing is that she said to me, they will come back and see you. And that's an honor as a primary care person because you do that. And you never know, but then all of a sudden there's an appointment there and they come back to see you. And I think one of the areas of my passion right now and the thing that moves me is in sex trafficking. And that came from sort of the different things you probably heard in my little intro. But I felt like I actually did a spiel at Kaiser where I was just like, grind through, see a lot of patients. And I felt, I could, after that, I could really do sports physicals. I could do that. But I had a young woman come in one day. I'm getting in the summer of sports physicals, so here we go again. And I had a young woman come in, and some of you, older people may remember Walden House, which was a drug treatment for young people, and for adults as well. And I had a young woman come in, she was 16, and I learned so much from this patient. She, we take the history, which includes the sex history. I said, are you in a relationship? She said, yeah. And I said, so how many partners do you think you've had last year? She goes, I've had hundreds. I was like, whoa. I go, so can you tell me a little more about that? She said, yeah, well, when I was 11, I ran away from home and I was trafficked. And I had, I don't know how many partners in my life, I've had to talk about STDs, and we got very medical about it. And I said, so how did you leave? Like, what happened? She goes, I escaped my trafficker, and this whole time as she's talking to me, I'm like, no one taught me anything about what you do. With, you know, what do I do? And I asked her that. I go, can you help me? Because I don't know. I need your help. And so she told me about the community organizations that were going on in San Francisco. Let's Uniting and then in training. There's an organization that used to call Stage that used to be around. And I learned from her, wow, I was like in honor because there is a resilient person. I'm like, I don't know if I could be where you are. I think I would be dead. I really do. But thank you for sharing your story. And how can I make sure that she goes, no, it's good, you know. And she was very matter of fact. And she actually came, you know. So one thing I learned, and was kind of alluded to earlier, is about cultural humility. And that's kind of the term you're hearing now. But I have stepped in so many bad puddles because I'm not aware of my own biases when I walk in the door. And it happens, and it's that consciousness of really understanding that person there and where they're coming from and knowing that you have biases. I walk in, I'm a white female. That's all they know about me, and I'm looking at whatever. And those little layers of everything that you've learned. And that's probably the most challenging thing I feel in primary care is to really like check in with that. And there are days where you're just overwhelmed and you just go into your automatic pilot and your patterns and you're kind of like disgusted with how things may have happened. But those bad days should be the most learning days. Like, okay, how could I do this better? And this one particular patient, the most amazing thing was, you know, I did see her for a while. She got out of Walden House. And then about 2 years later, I didn't know it was her. But she was in a little like nursing outfit. That's why I didn't really recognize her bias again, you know. She goes, do you remember me? And this was paper chart days. I'm like, yeah, I saw you a couple years ago. She goes, yeah, I remember I was at Walden House. I'm like, oh yeah. She goes, well, I'm here to get a physical because I'm going to go to nursing school. I was like, wow. So I was like, I'm so honored because, you know, I was thinking to myself, you're going to do it. You're going to be fine. I know she's gone through like major hoops and hurdles, and I go, thank you for teaching me so much. Because I can tell you right now, and I haven't asked her, can I use sort of like a story that I could tell? Because that was really important to share that, you know. She didn't look at it that way. She just looked at it as like, well, this is what I'm doing now. That was that phase of my life, and you know, this is where I am now, and I was really, really honored. And I see that, you know, with young people. I think, especially now, I look in this room because you guys almost look like adolescents to me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, so yeah. Well, no, and when I was chief resident, that was like taking care of residents. It was like, okay, I can go right into adolescent medicine after that. It's like, chief residents, I was like, you're just like at your raws. But again, you know, I look at where we are now, sort of, you know, globally, nationally, and even here in San Francisco. I guess my biggest hope as a healthcare person, and I'm so honored that you guys have something like this, is that I look towards the younger generation to kind of help things out. I'm doing my own battles over here, you know, to kind of change things like with healthcare access and better access for, you know, the young people over there that aren't over there in our city. And I think that, you know, why I'm in academics, you know, I mentioned I was at Kaiser. I came into academics to kind of give me that sort of my own like reminder of the importance of this. And I know a lot of people who go into teaching, that's why they do that, because otherwise, and I have a lot of colleagues who do sexual assault stuff, and that's all they do. And it's a burnout. It's a role like you just forget why you're doing it, or you just do primary care and you don't get to share the stories that you have with some of the people that are learning. But again, I think the even more important part is when you have that young person, for me, that is so resilient and so resistant and just survives. And I think, God, you need to write a book. It's just like some of the stories of young people, it's just quite amazing. And I think, you know, now, I like the kind of structural stuff. There's a lot of politics that you guys don't learn, and that's sort of a big frustrating thing in trying to figure out how to bounce it. You guys are kind of early. I know some of the people who are out there. It's not even just healthcare. Sometimes it's the laws of the state or the laws of the city, or the institutional stuff. I do want to give a little announcement for some of you who may know this, because it just happened today, and I feel like this is a great way to sort of end the story. I spent the last year fighting sort of UCSF on a clinic that's been sort of an institution in the mission. And it's only people of color who go there. It's a family planning clinic called New Generations Health Center. Has people heard of this?
Yeah.
So, good. So, you're getting a little update, and the announcement will probably come out tomorrow. I just found this out today, but it's officially going to stay open. And thank you all for your poof. So, the nuts and bolts is they're actually having the board meeting right now with homeless prenatal. So, and I was given that it was okay to talk about this, but once that's officially signed off, then they're working on, they've raised enough money to remodel the clinic there, and they'll, New Gen will move into, it's right up, and just logistically, it's on Potrero down from New Gen right now, is down from the General, and then it's moving across the street, which is nice, and actually it'll be a nice coexistent fit. So this has been like, talk about, really trying to get the leadership to understand the importance of young people, particularly young people who don't have a lot of the resources that, a lot of them can't vote. So I'm just glad that I could kind of announce that tonight for those of you who may not know. And then again, there'll be an announcement tonight. But thank you so much. I don't know if I went over my time, but, and if people want to ask questions about whatever later on, I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here, so thank you.
So it's great, Tanya, that you describe how you actually physically make yourself vulnerable by expressing when you don't know something to your patient and say, hey, help me here, teach me. And patients are very appreciative of those moments. It'll be very rare, I imagine, that a patient would say, wait a minute, you're the doctor, you're supposed to know. Whenever they say that, that's because they're resisting, wanting to kind of like figure out how to solve a problem, but the fact that of making ourselves vulnerable. So, and in fact, resistance, interestingly, right, there's that sense of, if you remember the poster for tonight is the fist, that has a very storied image. It's as much about strength as it is about vulnerability, right, because you just don't know what's going to come of it, but the passion inside you says, I gotta be here, I gotta do this, I gotta keep going. And I'm going to meet people along the way who are going to lift me up and help me take the next several steps. So thank you for sharing how you are in touch with your bias and how you make it known in ways that probably open up and give gifts to people in ways you will never know. So that's the end of our storytelling, but not the end of our words for the evening just yet. I want to make one last call for additional sticky notes. Why don't you pass, if you have a sticky note, raise your hand that you wrote on. 1, 2. There's any more sticky notes from the back? 3, up from the front, another one, 3. Okay, great. That's it? All right, that's cool. So let's see. So here it is. Resistance is giving until you can't give anymore, and loving until you can't love anymore. One love, one blood. Resistance is standing up, speaking up, and refusing to accept things as that's just the way it is. Resistance is the opposite of apathy. Resistance is empowering yourself and others. Resistance is necessary. Resistance is demanding and expecting more. Resistance means fighting for something you believe in by resisting something you don't. Resistance is community. Resistance is not giving up. Resistance is needed. Resistance is finding the good. Resistance is a choice for some, a necessity for others. Resistance is kindness. Resistance is resilience. Resistance is a duty. Resistance is not a 4-letter word. Resistance is being kind to all people. And resistance is speaking out against injustice. Resistance is born of compassion. Resistance is promoting equality by overthrowing the status quo. And I'll end with this. Resistance is perseverance, awareness, strength. So, let's put our hands together for all our speakers this evening. Remember the images evoked in your minds as you heard the stories of those courageous, resilient, vulnerable people that came up here tonight, and file it away somewhere for when you need a little bit of inspiration, when there's a call to action that you feel just compelled to say yes to, and then just go for it. Thank you very much.
Dr. Pache, thank you for moderating. Can we give a round of applause to Dr. And thank you to all of our speakers. We actually have the coordinators at Primary Care Progress prepared some thank you cards and sunflowers to express their gratitude for all of you. Maybe one more round of applause. And thank you to all of our sponsors as well. So just wanted to say that we at Primary Care Progress are very grateful for all of you for coming out and making this event a success. I hope that you all continue to reflect on the stories that you heard today and reflect on what resistance means. Thank you all.
Thank you.